Good morning. I move. Okay, today is Wednesday, the 18th of April, 2018. This is the nybbles.io daily programming stream. I'm Jeff, and I typically program every day, 5 a.m. to 10 a.m., and I stream those sessions Monday through Saturday. Unfortunately, this morning I am feeling horrible. I think I have another infection, and I have a fever. So I think today's stream is going to be short, and since my brain is very foggy, I find that when I try to code, I generate garbage, essentially. I'd be great as a fuzzer, when I'm not feeling well. So what I wanted to do, maybe, for the stream today was I could entertain Q&A, but also I was thinking I would go through my to-do list here and kind of tidy it up. And there's some things that I do need to kind of think through, like, the input binding stuff has some issues. And then some of these are very high level to-dos, and I would like to maybe make them a bit more detailed. So yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do today. I don't know how long I'll be online today, maybe a couple hours. We'll see how I feel. So yeah, at any point, if anybody has questions, just shoot them out and I will try to answer. And in the meantime, I'm going to kind of go through the loadable view stuff. I didn't do anything post stream. I actually fell asleep yesterday and then was interrupted and then felt horrible and then went back to bed. And I gotten a lot of sleep the last several days, which that's usually a hint that I am not well, because if I'm sleeping a lot and I still feel like crap. Unfortunately, I've had doctors tell me I have a variety of health issues, but I've had doctors tell me you need to move someplace where the climate never changes. And here in the Southwest, it's pretty close. For the vast majority of the year, it's very warm here. It's very dry, and I do better in dry climates. But we do still kind of have a winter here. It still does get cold, relatively cold, right? I mean, it's not like when I lived in Chicago and it would be -20 with a -40 wind chill, but still it does get cold and it rains and the humidity changes, and yeah. Hey, Meshuggah Sahin. I'm not feeling super great today, so maybe I'll have a short stream here, a couple hours. I'll do some housekeeping stuff. So one of the bug design issues that I've got is, so the way the input action stuff works right now, it is a what is input action? I can't even remember. I don't even trust my comments. Yeah, so I put a comment here. Switch catalog to a map that looks something like this. Text box delete, action sync, view, and then, right, the things that are registered for that type. So what do we have here? Input action catalog is, I think it's just a standard vector. Yeah. So, and then handlers is a map. Yeah. An action sync type is an enum. Actually, it's just a action sync type. It's just a 16-bit integer. Then we have action sync, which has the types of it. Yeah, so this kind of is coming back to me a little bit. Yeah, this is the problem of having a structure like this that is parallel to the other structures that use it. Right, because that's what this is trying to emulate, I think. There is no difference between HPP and H files. It's just name. Yeah. The PP. Yeah, so here's the problem with this. It's not right. How's that? It's not right. Yeah, the problem is this is called from engine, I think. Yeah. Yeah, so what we really want here, what would be ideal, is if we could pass something into the catalog here. Hey Gmon, that would filter. So we have a hierarchy, right? We have the app, we have context. Inside of context, we have states. One state can be active at a time. Inside of states, we have views. One view can be active at a time, or can be focused at a time. And so what we really want is we want to somehow, ideally, catalog would return back a tree of applicable actions that could be processed based on the current state of the engine. And then the whole idea of the sync type, I think, well, I don't know if it goes away, but it changes, that's for sure. Welcome, Bad Hombre. Hey, the Cool X. The thing is, what would I pass in from here? I mean, I suppose, no, it doesn't really work. Trying to remember where the duplicate was at. Yeah, I want to say this was the example I had. One of them. I mean, there's probably others. Alright, this is going to go to the view handler, which is fine. View. Helps if I don't hit tab inside there. But, okay, now we're inside of the text editor. And hi MTC 743, and now tab is going to view, not to the handler that's inside of the text editor. This is one example of the problem. And why is that? Well, that's because this got registered. Technically, the view is visible. You know, the condition here is true. Right. The parent sees that it's focused and visible. Now this might be a somewhat special case of this scenario though. I think there was another one that I ran into where I think I was in, yeah, I don't know, I think it was in something else. And it may have been the text editor again. But my expectation would be that this would get called. And it's not. Because this would be registered after the parent, so we have an ordering problem. But there was another one of these though where a view was trying to do something, and I think the controller also had bound some key press. Maybe it was even this, I don't know. Oh yeah, it was the delete key. Yeah. Yeah. Because the delete key is applicable to the text. Well, it's kind of applicable to everything. But this, I believe this gets called in preference to other things. Yeah. Because it's was registered first, right? And backspace is not working. Backspace is not backspace. Yeah, it's not even calling this. Is it even calling the input filter? It is calling the input filter. But it's saying it's not focused. Hey, Arkansas Snowman. That's interesting. Why is it saying it's not focused? because see, now it says it's not focused. That's not right. Well, that's part of the problem. I mean, so obviously at some point we're coming in here and it's turning the curate on. Hi, Zenga85. Excuse me. Excuse me. The host is saying it's not focused. We're focused. The host isn't. But why is that? Yeah, see, now it's stuck. So let's check. I'm guessing it just doesn't matter in the others because they don't have any overrides. So the issue just never came up. Now let's do carrot right. I'm guessing it's the same situation. Yeah. That's interesting. Huh. Now it's showing as focused. That's weird. So this is being called from process action. And the sync is 5. So we're at the view level. But at that level, it says it's false. I'm working on a program called Ryu. We're still at level 5. Oh, this is a different action. Okay, I get it. Things are being filtered, so I'm going over all the actions every time, which is wasteful. But eventually we hit the one that is in we hit this when it's in context, and then it's correct. Okay. But then for text editor, but now it, you know, when we get focus. Why is it true here but by the time we get back, it's not true. I have no idea. MTC 743, but probably. I think it's fair to say that most corporations probably have more of everything but programmers. That's probably not true, but yeah, it wouldn't surprise. And I also would say this, even if in numbers Oracle doesn't have the same, has fewer lawyers, they're better paid and better respected. So take that for what it's worth, I guess. I'm just curious if it's a scoping issue. My hairstyle? The fact that I have almost none? One of these days I'm going to be on stream and I'm just going to be completely bald. Every time I go to get what little hair I have left cut, and I really don't care. I'm not one of those guys that like is super depressed about losing hair. Like I was gonna say, I've been tempted to tell the stylist, just shave my head, get rid of it. I'm tired of it. No, it still doesn't work. What in the world? Because the context is not. Huh? Because the state stack says the state we're in is not the one that's active. I don't understand that at all. That doesn't make sense. Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. I understand now. Yes. Okay. It's coming back to me. Oh my God. My head is so messed up. Okay. So here's the issue. Other than the fact that C-Line doesn't like standard bind, like what does it think is wrong here? Okay, so the issue is text editor is used in multiple places. And this is the fundamental issue with what I have. So somehow the event binding stuff is static. Not right. It's being initialized once. And that once has to be applicable to all the different runtime combinations that occur for this particular thing. In the case of the text editor is being used in the source editor, it's being used all over the place. And so the issue here is somehow, right, and this goes back to what I was talking about earlier with input action. When we ask for the catalog here from the engine, we somehow need to tell it this is the slice of the system, or this is the slice of the runtime structure that is applicable at the moment, right? Not these other things. Because what's happening is inside of input action, these are failing in earlier registered, welcome Bubby Bite. These are being registered earlier, and it's just a quirk of the order these things are getting processed in. Yeah. Excuse me. It all starts at the catalog, really, because we don't want input actions that are not applicable to the context. So how could we do that? Oh, my head. So input action right now has no relationship to where it's at. So we could do something similar to what we're doing on the handlers. We could have a filter callback on the input action. And in situ, the input action callback could say, I'm a valid input action right now, I'm not. So then what we could do, if we did it that way, is in the catalog calls. We could have two of them. We could have catalog that returns back a reference to the catalog and you get the whole thing. We could have, filtered filtered catalog or active catalog or something. And what that would do is that would loop through the catalog entries and it would execute this callback on the input action. that, and the default filter for it would just be like the default filter for the handlers. It would just return true. But you could then override it to where you could say, okay, this, in this runtime context, right, this curate left action is valid because my parent is focused, or I'm focused, or whatever. And then what that would do is, even though there would be a text editor instance that has the same registration in a different controller, a different state, because that state's not active, that action would not be considered in that context. It would get filtered out. Now, the beauty of that is that's actually nice for a couple reasons. One, we're doing more work right now than we should. Yeah, meaning we're walking the entire action, input action array, even though a good number of them are not valid. But to get the filtered list, we would have to walk the whole catalog every time. So we could enhance input action to where we cache the filtered catalog, and then whenever in the engine, right, whenever state changes, which we have there's a tight area where that's the case. We could call something, right, to refresh the cache so that we're not calling those callbacks on, input action all the time. I think that's the solution here. Because then what would happen is you'd only get input actions for contexts that are active, for states that are active, and then for the view stuff. The view stuff's already kind of written that way, but it'd be the same thing. If a particular view is not, yeah, and so focused is the wrong context there. It really would be, the input action for a view would say, it's actually plural, Decameron. It's songs current. Don't ask me why. It's just what they called it. I could probably make aliases for those. Actually, let me see how hard that would be to do here. Probably not very. If I add a command, call it song, and it's an alias for songs current. All right. Yeah, okay. There, I created an alias for you. Okay, so then if I create an alias here, There we go. Okay. Yeah, I think that's probably because the other alternative is probably not as nice, actually. Although it might be more performant, I don't know. Well, it definitely probably be more performant. I mean, the other thing we could do is I could create an actual, like a nice little binary tree or something would probably be applicable here. And when you create input actions, you have to specify who your owner is. And then, you know, I would use the tree to categorize things, right? So then when we buy the actual instance and the relationship to other things, right? But that's gonna get messy fast. So I think the real answer here, or at least a first cut, okay. So I think that's the answer there. MTC 743 says, why is writing a C++ compiler harder than writing a C compiler? Because C++ is vastly more complex than C. They are not the same language. In fact, I don't know, this might seem obvious, but maybe not. C++ is not C. I mean, they are not the same language. The fact that C++ looks like C and is mostly compatible with C is that's intentional, but they're not the same language. There's just a subset of C++ that is 99.995% C-like. And they share ABI characteristics on some level so that they can be compatible at the binary layer. But yeah, C++ as a compiler the language is much more complex. So there's just a lot more to do. And that's why the compilers are harder to write and possibly why they're so slow. But I think a lot of the reason that C++ specifically is slow is just because of header files and the nature of how that works, and they have to revisit things many times. And it wasn't a mistake at the time. I guess you could argue that they had to do it for memory reasons and processing reasons, but you know, C, the compiler, there was no program, right? There were units, and the compiler was designed around compiling units. And so every time the compiler is introduced to a new unit, meaning a new C file, it starts over. That is the unit of work, no pun intended, for a C compiler. And for C++, to maintain a lot of compatibility, and C++ started life as a preprocessor in C, as C front, or C++ front, or whatever it was called, C front, I think. There's a lot of historical tie there. But the idea with C was always that there was this other program, the linker, that would tie everything together. And for better or worse, that drove a whole bunch of implementation details that caused C and C++ to be more complex than they probably ought to be today. Right? Computers are substantially faster. Memory is not really an issue on most machines where code is being compiled. And the unit concept and generating object files and spooling those together, we probably don't need that complexity in the vast majority of scenarios. There might be some special case scenarios where it has some applicability, but I would say it wouldn't be the common case. But anyway, that's my long-winded answer to that. C++ is just friggin' complex. That's why. Okay, so I think I have an answer for that. Mouse events are actually, I think, not that complicated. I mean, we essentially have, if we take the simplest case and we're just interested in mouse clicks on buttons and lists and things like that, which, I mean, that would be a good start, right? That would cover a very broad range of things, in at least in Ryu. I think adding, you basically would say what button it is. You provide a bounding rectangle, or the filter callback could check this, right? Given mouse XY position in event data T. So I actually think that's fairly straightforward. Now, where that gets a little more complex is like dragging and things like that, but we don't have to worry about that right now. So adding Shift Tab, so right now in View, and this I think probably just needs to be refactored a little bit anyway. So in View, there's one listener right now for tabbing. We would create another one here for Shift Tab, because historically, cycling through fields using the keyboard, Tab moves you to the next field, Shift Tab moves you to the previous field. But
Oh, yeah.
thank you, Squid of War. But the way I have this implemented sucks. What a surprise. So what really probably should happen here is right now I have a callback. And the reason I have a callback is because, I don't know why, because of some peculiarity of the way I wrote something, mostly. Yeah, like I don't. So I think the better thing to do here, instead of having a callback, we'd have a struct. Or, yeah, we'd have a struct, or we'd have two fields on view, next view, previous view, and those could just be pointers to views that you want to go to. And then we'd have a setter, right, that lets you set the pair of those. And it's just data. Instead of a callback, and then this would just be, hey, is the next, field or the next view set? Oh, it is? Okay, then do this, right? And the same thing here, is previous set? Okay, then go do that. So let's do this. Get rid of this callback, replace it with two fields on view, next view, Jesus, I can't type, and previous view. Next view and previous view. Next view. Okay, I think that makes that much easier. Okay. Let's figure out how to surface errors. So I think the answer to this is pretty obvious. I think the right thing to do here is we need to add some kind of dialogue mechanism to Ryu. Now, I mean, there are two ways we could do this, I guess. Technically, SDL2 does support multiple OS windows. I'm a little iffy on that one because, not because I think opening the window would be hard. It wouldn't. The issue would just be more like all the plumbing in the system assumes there's one window right now. And if you run in full screen mode, which I think folks might frequently do with this, because of the nature of what it is, yeah, it makes dialogues and stuff just hokey. So I think what we really just need to do here is new, create either a state or a common dialogue or a special kind of thing the engine knows as a dialogue that sits atop other states, draws a frame, header, buttons, and content can be any dock layout. Raise error dialog where applicable. All right, so I think that breaks that one down. We have to add some feature somehow to the framework that allows us to say, oh, show a dialogue. And ideally, we want that to be that simple, right? And we can make it configurable. You know, these are the buttons we want. This is what goes in. This is the view we want to show inside of it. So it could be as simple as just text. It could be a complex dialogue that has stuff in it that you're going to edit or whatever. Excuse me. Oh, I fixed this actually. See, this is why I wanted to go through this, because I kind of figured I'd find a bunch of stuff. And if I just spent some time thinking about a lot of these, yeah, the pick list, there's a couple things we need to be able to, so let's new pick list, add field and get set for height of drop down portion. make the field an actual text box and search list when user types. Page up, page down, bindings. Oh, preferences. So yeah, we need to find a way to so preferences live in the application. The application is the root object of the system. Essentially, main creates an application and calls run on it, init and run. I'll be right back, guys. Gotta take a short break. Be right back. I gotta start the process. I need a new coffee maker. High powered, super fast. All right. Let that run asynchronously here. What was I doing? I can't even remember now. I was looking at the to-do list. Oh, let's see. Back to that. I don't think we'll be creating our own meta layer. Should we add a clear symbols command? Hey, Rita. I think that's pretty easy to do, pretty painless. Should we clear the symbol table? Yeah, let's just do that. Oh, I'm not feeling well today. I've got a fever. Yeah, I've got another infection. I got to start round 2 of my coffee here. So today is going to be a shorter stream. Yeah, we're going to wrap up here in about 30 or 40 minutes. Today what I'm doing is, in lieu of writing a lot of code, I'm going through my to-do list here and tidying it up and just kind of thinking through some of the things that are outstanding, and so that when I am in a better shape, I'll have all this already kind of thought through and had notes made and everything. So my close project should clear symbol table. Should ROM even be write protected during development? I think we pretty much have solved this issue. During the assemble phase, we changed the write latch on ROM. I don't think this is really an issue anymore. Kind of addressing this in the changes above. I grab my coffee, be right back. Okay. What else do we have here? Anybody a good artist? Anybody know any artists? Finding artists is difficult. So specifically, what I'm looking for is because right now I'm drawing those tabs in the I'm drawing them, and The code is probably not that optimal. I mean, there are some nice things about drawing it versus using a bitmap or something, but because drawing it it scales to different resolutions a little bit easier. But these things aren't that, you know, complex. They're just buttons of a sort. Yeah, so this little tab thing here, these are being drawn in code right now. And my thought was that I would replace these with just a bitblit. They'd just be a bitmap. And then the nice thing about a bitmap is you could have some fancier stuff on here, like little grip bars, or I don't know. An artist could make them look, I think, more appealing than what they are in code. So if anybody knows any artists that would like to do that, or knows of some pre-existing art that would fit that need, even if the art assets require a little bit of adjustment. Okay. Oh, I know what I was doing before I took the break. I was looking at preferences. So preferences live in the application. And they don't ever go anywhere. They just stay here. But I guess that's not true. Am I passing that in? Well, I guess that's a lie. I am passing a reference into engine initialize. But I'm not storing it or anything. So I think what we probably should do, because if engine has something, but it can't be a const reference, it's going to have to be either a mutable reference or a pointer. I probably would prefer to pass a pointer, to be honest. So I'm thinking what we want to do is we want to add core references pointer to engine, and then in initialize change const refs to core references pointer and store in prefs. Okay, because if we do that, then engine has access to the preferences, and then we can context has access to the engine. So worst case scenario, we can put on context an accessor here then what that lets us do is here, which I've commented the code out temporarily, but I would be able to get the executable path then. I'd be able to do context arrow engine, arrow preferences, or even we could just put a preferences wrapper on, you know, probably that's what I would need to do. And then you can just ask the context, hey, give me the preferences pointer. And that's good, because if we do that, then that allows us to plumb through preferences to the rest of the system in a reasonable way. And then when we want to implement the preferences UI, we have access to it. So new change engine initialize to accept preferences pointer instead of ref store in field add for preferences. Okay, so now that gives us a way of plumbing preferences through. So the component editor, we need to create a view YAML file for the layout, implement button callbacks. Mostly the component editor, I think, is going to be pretty straightforward. We're already working on those, so I think we have a good idea of what that looks like. Okay, so this thing, this core observable, that's been kind of floating around for a while now. Excuse me. Hey, Slayer Darth. Yeah, so the idea with this is, if we look at state header is an example of where I had something like this. Yeah, so on project, I have an interface, a static interface that allows me to register callbacks with the project object, and whenever the project changes in some way, all the listeners are notified. This is an example, a very simplistic example of what I was thinking. So what would be nice here is we have project, we have project file, we have environment, we have a bunch of things, right? And if those things change, we want to be able to be notified of that. Now there's a couple ways that we can probably do this. Right, we could have a real observer system. Hey, Rexoid10, welcome. We could have a real observer system that's kind of in parallel to everything else. I think that's probably what I was thinking when I put this in here. And then it kind of acts as a, you know, clearinghouse for objects that are subscribed to can then tell this observable thing, hey, I've changed in a meaningful way, let my listeners know. Or yeah, see, yeah. I think that's really what it would have to be. So in Cocoa, if I remember correctly, and it's been a while, Coco has notification center. Yeah. Yeah, so this is basically what I'm thinking. Something like this. NS Notification Center, I think, is a singleton. Yeah, looks like it. And then you can add observers, and the observed can post notifications. So I think this is kind of this idea is roughly what I was thinking. And so essentially what it would be doing is taking what I did on project, not project, project. Hey, B. Jeffus. Right, so there's a specific callback here on project, and add listener is static here, and then I have static daters for the project specifically. This would all get genericized. There'd be a notification thingamabobber. Let's just rip off Apple's name, huh? Let's just create a new core notification center that encapsulates and we need to refactor project into this model, and then helpers to send notifications. And so I think that's what I was thinking there. Okay, yeah, so this would be kind of like the next thing here. So implement full and correct project editor interface. So to break this down, what this becomes, I believe, is you need to create a new controller, create new project editor controller. This will be IDE. Create project editor YAML new file. And this is going to have project header. So it'll have a state header, project header, information, project files, button, panel for add, edit, remove, clear files. Then we want to create another, create new. Hey BGSS, I am working on something called Ryu. Let's see here, create new. So I want to create this shortcut thing, something like this. So this is actually kind of dependent, using new dialog system. Create IDE project is this thing called anyway? Project jump. Controller. And we need to create the project new file. So that's what this really represented in my mind. And there's nothing, this is just a column pick list. The buttons here already exist. All the input here already exists. Right, so there's no new views here. There might be new views required here. Right. It's kind of sort of like a pick list on both sides, but yeah, this is more like the regular pick list here without the text field. So is this. So I don't know, I have to think about that one. Plus, there's probably going to be a new data structure needed here. MRU for files on project, right? Because when you use this, it keeps track of what you've been doing. And so if you keep doing Control E, like you can jump between what you were just doing and it'll take you back, right? So it behaves like an MRU. Yeah, and then column pick list, when we first created this, there were things that should have been added, but I never got around to it. So column pick list enhancements, fix white space, adding issues, render footer with scrolling indicators, or with size indicators, e.g. page X and Y, row Z, and support for type ahead, search, and then page up, page down, input action. I'm not as worried about the text editor at the moment. We'll come back to that. So the palette editor, I mean, we kind of sort of did this in the MS-DOS thing, right? We didn't finish it, but we got kind of close. And it's really very similar. As is the tile sprite editor. So new IDE palette editor controller, create palette editor view YAML file, may need, actually we will need new color editor view, which would be, what would it look like? It'd be something like this, right? It would have the color swatch, and then red, green, blue, so actually let's make that number 1. Number 2 would be to create an editor around that. 3, this is the first need to get parameters for palette from the machine's video generator IC. So this is the first scenario where one of our editors will need to talk to the machine and look at a component specifically and say, hey, Mr. Video Generator, tell me about palettes. And cool, wormhole. Or do we just call this palette entry view? And then do we, I think probably new palette view, which is just a this is a multi-column layout of palette entry views. This I need to think about, how are we going to do this? Because I haven't really yeah, need to think about that. I think the easiest thing here would be to have an interface. Like a palette provider. Or we could even go one step further, video generator, right? And the video generator interface is going to have things on it like palette size, does it have tiles, what are their size, have sprite, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then the actual IC that is the implementation of that. A lot of those details are either going to be like in registers or, you know, they're going to be very low level because the IC represents hardware abstraction. But it will implement this interface and then that component can return back whatever those values. I think that's the right thing to do. And then we also, while we're at it, sound generator. Now, here's where this gets interesting with the palette editor. Well, I guess that could be on the video generator. In assembly, why can't we have variable more than 3 letters? What do you mean? You can. Sure. I mean, most assemblers support label sizes that are quite large. If you're talking about register names, yeah, I mean, registers that's a fixed thing, but those aren't really variables. It's best to think of those as registers. But yeah, you can create a label, right? My really long assembly var db. I mean, heck, even 86, which was implemented decades ago, supports variable or label names that long. What CPU are you using, Wormhole, Mr. Wormhole? Yeah, those are registers. Those aren't variables. The register names are typically very short. So we need to know where in the memory map this would go. Because in some systems, the palette exists in RAM and the hardware reads that RAM. In some systems, you actually interface with the IC and the palette data lives within its internal memory space, within that component. So we need to know where it goes. I think that's a more general thing though. And the memory map. So something along those lines. Okay. So I think that pretty much defines up what that would be. MTC743 says, is camel case or snake case commonly used in industry? Yeah, it depends on the language. In the Microsoft world, Microsoft uses Pascal case for everything. So all their stuff tends to be Pascal case. Java started off using camel case, so that's pretty much what it does. Yeah, in C and C++, it all is preference. There isn't so much of a standard. You'll see coding styles of all kinds. Oftentimes, you'll see naming styles that are inconsistent, right? You'll see maybe they started with camel case, or they use camel case for some things and snake case for others, or Pascal case even. Some people combine Pascal and Snakecase, which I think is nasty. Yeah, it's just, again, here's the deal on all that stuff, MTC 743. If you're working with somebody else, with a group, and they've already done something, then you have to conform, whether you like it or not. So if you are doing a C# project, it's probably Pascal case all the way. And it doesn't make any sense to deviate from that. If you're doing a Java project, then it's going to be camel case. And it doesn't make any sense to deviate from that. If you're doing C++ and you're writing code for Google, then you're going to follow their coding conventions, whether you agree with them or not. And that's the case for pretty much any project, that if you are working with other people and other people have already made those choices, then you have to conform. If you're working on your own thing that you control, or that you have a significant level of input for, then you can do whatever you want. Pick the convention that you like. I like Snakecase. I like lowercase. I don't like noise in my code generally, and I view those other naming conventions to be noisy. I prefer the K&R bracing notation or bracing style. I don't particularly like the BSD or whatever the other bracing styles are. The names are eluding me at the moment. So I do it my way. And that's really ultimately what it comes down to. So, and Slayer Darth says, screw conformity. I'm like the only one in our dev shop who puts brackets on their own line. Yeah, I just find that I don't want to get into arguments about that sort of stuff. So I just avoid. Whatever the style is locally, that's what I conform to, whether I like it or not, So the tile editor, need new tile editor view. Takes width, height, fat pixel size. Need tile selection or tile selector view with height, position, need palette selector view. So I think the tile editor can be generically both sprites and tiles. It doesn't have to be just, it can be reused. So then a question is, okay, so in the MS-DOS stuff and in the ARM assembly stuff, I needed to create an actor system, and I was doing the same thing in Rusty Kong. And so the implementation of an actor system, I think would still be up to the game, but maybe what we could do is we could have a tool that lets you build actors. And then, the tool can predefine some data, and then it's up to the game whether or not it wants to use that data. So let's do that. IDE, actor, editor. Need an actor, or need a tile arrange, the tile layout editor view. Need a timeline / frames view. Add, edit, remove frames. Need a playback, play, stop, restart button for animations. Generates assembly include manually specify memory map location for origin. Because the actor editor is really not, it's not hardware based. This is just like a metadata helper. Because again, it's a very common thing that most of these games would need. And then we need to do IDE, background, editor, controller. Need tile selector view, tile, how do we choose which tile? Okay, and then finally preferences. So this covers like almost all the graphics. This covers all the graphics. Palettes, tiles, sprites, actors, and backgrounds. The preferences, oh, there's one other thing though. Well, I'll come to that in a minute. I'm not sure how to do that or how I want to do that. So I think mostly preferences are fairly straightforward. Create preferences, YAML new file. Maybe use core notebook to break up sections. Reuse palette editor views to customize, to allow customization of IDE in menu palettes. Input bindings. Okay, so as far as the IDE is concerned, I think that's the IDE. There are a couple of, I guess you could call them tool things related to the emulator. So similar maybe to MAME, I'm working on something called Ryu. Similar to like MAME and maybe like Pico 8. Like the game itself, when you run it in the emulator, maybe we want to track, we want to treat the game maybe like the physical machine itself. Like, so there's settings for the machine, like dip switches and all that, where you would probably be making those changes to the machine instance itself. Oh no. That's a bummer. So yeah, I think we need like I'm gonna call it a service menu or something, like not ID, emulator service menu or service controller, I don't know. This one's going to be a bit more rough. but I know we need it. You know, the question of how that actually ends up getting in there. So I'm going to take these and move these up here. So I am familiar with Qt, yeah. Hey, Sean. Yeah, I mean, if you, hey, Sean, if you want to join my Discord and then just ping me directly, we can chat about it. That's cool. Yeah. Because to test all this, I would really like to get just the most basic functionality going in the emulator. This won't be the end, right? This is just the beginning of it, but something basic so that we can kind of sort of test stuff out. So okay, let's look at this other stuff here. Okay, so what are these? I have refactor once column T struct. Yeah, that's fine. These are mostly small things. Add serialized interface for use by AST to apply values struct. What was I thinking here? I think the idea here was that I have stream overloads, I think, for these right now. And yeah, it's all stream based. So I think the idea was Yeah, I'm not sure what I was thinking there. So you know what? Maybe, I don't know. Can't remember now. Because I think the idea here was, instead of having I don't know. It doesn't make sense anymore. Get rid of it. It'll, if it's important, it'll come back. Oh yeah, so new. That one we should definitely do. Oh yes, and then refactor. Use Pratt parser model to completely replace shunting yard operator implementation. Pratt parsers make precedence parsing and recursive descent parsers much easier to work with. And the shunting yard implementation I have, it works, but it's extremely nasty, complex, and there's just certain things that it's not real conducive to supporting. Like we have some operators like dupe that have kind of a strange, they can be prefix, they can be infix, they can be postfix. So switching to a Pratt parser model for that, it should make that code so much simpler than it is right now. And it should make it infinitely easier to modify going forward. Okay. And we're not going to worry about this branch for now. I'm still trying to decide what of this. I have a fever and I'm sick. So I am not working at full capacity today, which is why I'm mostly just going through my to-do list and kind of just doing preparatory work so that when I am back to my, well, mostly normal self, I'll have already gone through the effort of doing this, and it should make things a lot easier. So I'll put this out to the community. I hate websites. I hate making them. But I would like a website specifically for Ryu. And when I say website, I'm thinking like a landing page. We probably should have somebody create a logo for it. I'm willing to pay. So if someone wants to contact me and you have experience doing web dev and you think you would want to tackle that, let's talk about that. Because if I leave that for me to do, it won't get done anytime soon. At some point, I will spend the time to flesh out the README. Actually, let's do that. Let's move that in here so that cool. Why is artist a bad word? Graphic designer or... Yeah, Slayer Darth, if you want to let me know. Hit me up direct chat on Discord, and we'll talk. Because like I say, that will literally be the very last thing I do if I leave it for myself. Because I have no interest in it. I know I need it, but I have no interest in it. So, yeah, okay, good. I feel much better about this. So now I've gone through, made notes on things. I kind of know roughly where stuff's going to go. Oh, I do need to merge. Let's cherry pick from feature piece table, core types, because there was some stuff in there that was important. Okay, that really kind of accomplishes what I wanted to accomplish today. Before I go though, I did spend some time just like noodling in my mind, right? So, you know, I've talked about wanting to create my own programming language and some of my ideas around that. And I've been doing a lot of research, a lot of reading, and because I don't want to tread where those have tread before and made mistakes. And it turns out that a lot of the ideas I have, as usual, they're very old and have existed since the late 1950s and early 1960s. For some reason, like most things in computer science, they seem to just disappear through the winds of time. But specifically, if you guys are interested, you can always look this up. It's called Meta 2. It's a very interesting historical piece. And there are things related to Meta 2. There's tree meta and other things out there. So some people have done this before. Now, you know, well, here's the thing, Slayer Darth. What I would like to do, the ideas I have for a programming language are quite different, I think, for most other languages. So, and maybe this gives you some idea of where my mind is going. Now, this is a very trivial example, and obviously this does not work. This is just me sketching out thoughts of what I would want to have so that I could build it. But what I want to do is I want to build a language. I want to build a compiler that allows you to build any language you want. And so if you want to make a language that is geared towards game development, you can do that. If you want to make a language that's geared towards accounting systems, you can do that. And I want to make it so easy to spin up new languages that this thing that we have where we're all very much, you know, kind of stuck with syntax becomes less of a problem. Plus, I kind of view this as like a really advanced macro system, because that's where I started in my thinking with all this was, well, I have assemblers, and if you go all the way to like HLA, HLA has a really advanced macro system to the extent that you can almost build grammars with it. Graal VM, so I'm going to talk about Graal and LLVM and some other things here in a minute. No, it's not, is the short answer, but I'm going to talk about those. So actually, let me make a note to myself, you know, talk about Graal, LLVM, etc. So let's talk about this. So what is this? This is eBNF with a couple of tweaks to it. that defines a very, very simple grammar. And you can have a digit. A digit can be one of these characters. You can have a number, which can optionally have a minus, a digit, and then at least one digit, and then additional digits if you want them. And then the kind of the root of this particular grammar is optionally a number followed by a comma, followed by more numbers, followed by a semicolon at the very end. So this is very simple grammar. But this gives you an idea of where my mind's going. What I'm thinking is that, so this is obviously binding to a namespace, a variable, whatever you want to call it, a slot. And we have this concept of defining a grammar. And you define the grammar as E, B, and F. And the grammar is independent, meaning that the compiler will always take this and turn any stream you feed to the grammar into an abstract syntax tree. That's what this produces, is an AST, and that's it. So compared to things like Meta, where you actually put special output symbols into the grammar itself, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to keep the grammar independent from the compiler, the translator, whatever you want to call it. I'm calling it a compiler right now. Maybe translator is a better term. I don't know. But that's your grammar. And you can create as many grammars as you want. That's the idea. So if you want a C# grammar, if you want a C grammar, if you want a J grammar, create whatever grammars you want. And it's EBNF, and if you read up on EBNF, you'll see that it's actually pretty trivial to define grammars with EBNF. But you want to take that grammar and you want to turn it into something that runs, okay? And something that runs has multiple meanings here. So the idea is you could then say, here's a compiler for this particular grammar. And using a matching model, and I'm not, this is just my initial thought, right? Based on what I've seen with like tree meta and meta 2 and other things that work this way. You know, this is a variable name. This is the binding of the AST node, right? So any number that exists in the AST gets mapped to this implementation. This is where my virtual assembly would go, right? So I want to build a virtual machine, and we're going to talk about virtual machine because this gets confusing. So bear with me. And you know, this is going to, the n variable here is like a substitution, right? So anywhere in my assembly code, I can substitute that in and do something with it, right? And so this would generate my own virtual machine code here. That's the actual implementation. But here's the, and what would this do? I mean, my thought is this would just take the number string here and it would push it on the stack and make a call to some output function, right? So I would have, you know, I'd have something like push n, I don't know, and maybe I want to be able to, you know, indicate that n is a substitution or something, I don't know. And then I would call, you know, some kind of system, you know, standard out, right, I don't know, right? And that's something that the runtime would have built in, right, in this scenario, just to test with. But this would generate this virtual assembly code, and then down here, the compiler would have some built-in functionality that would allow you to, there would be a main entry point. In this case, I'm just assigning main to one of the test functions I had. And so I was thinking of different ways that a stream of these numbers could come in, right? So I might have a function that reads from standard in. I might have a function that reads from a list of source files, right, that come from the command line. And I might have a function that reads from a string. And run and string stream, these are like pseudo instructions, sort of like using in compiler and grammar. They're part of the compiler directives. They're not really code in the strictest sense. Pound might make them more clear as to what they're doing. But because this is a virtual machine that's running inside the compiler, when this run here, this is running it during compilation, right? Just like John Blow has the same thing, right? He can take some arbitrary J code and he can run it during the compilation process. The same thing is true here. We can take any input stream given a particular compiler and say, here, run this in the context of the compiler. And this is how you would then bootstrap more complex things on top of basic implementations. And then ultimately, you might have a compiler, right, that isn't a meta compiler meant in like a macro sense, but more it's meant to output an actual program that you're going to run later. And the distinction there is just, instead of saying run, maybe you say link, or probably link or something like that, right? Some statement, some meta statement that the compiler understands, that instead of saying, hey, you're going to run this thing that you just compiled, you're going to write it out, you're going to link it out, and it's going to be something that can run. And then that would go through a native translation layer, perhaps, right? So let me talk briefly about like Graal and LLVM and all this stuff, right? So Graal has similar ideas, sort of, except not. Graal is more of like an embedder's dream, in my opinion. If you look at it, the ideas, they seem to highlight the idea that you can take Graal, embed it inside of Java, and then you can run JavaScript, right? And so you can add dynamicism to an existing platform by using Graal. And their polyglot concept, right, is very similar to like .NET, in the sense that what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, hey, here are all these roughly equivalent languages, and because they can all run on Graal, they can all kind of interop with each other. But that's just interop. That's interesting, that's great, but that's not really all that valuable. What I want is I want to be able to build new languages, new grammars on the fly, and have those be able to generate code, which then in turn can generate more code, and all that stuff is happening at compile time. It's not, here's my source code in this fixed grammar, it got compiled to this output, it's being run through this runtime, right? That's Graal. And so Graal is a virtual machine in the sense, an interpretive or late bound compiled virtual machine in the sense of what I'm using the term as. So when I say virtual machine, I'm referring to things like the JVM, the Lua virtual machine, Graal, things that take a virtual machine specification, a virtual assembly language, machine code, and either can interpret that, run that dynamically through an interpreter loop, or can just-in-time compile that, or can statically ahead of time compile that. LLVM is an unfortunately named library. On some level, you can say, yes, LLVM is a virtual machine. However, it's not really a virtual machine in the sense that I am using it. It's more of a ahead-of-time compiler framework. Yes, there are some interpreters for bitcode, and I believe Graal also can consume, you know, LVM, right? Bitcode. But the more I've done research on LVM, the less it fits, unfortunately, at least with the early parts of what I'm trying to do here. LVM might be perfect for the back-end translation, meaning that at some point you're going to take this, the compiler is going to take this, you know, virtual assembly language that I'm creating here that's running against my virtual machine, and I'm going to want to take those and create native instructions for that. So if I don't want to spend all the time writing native translators, which I really don't, what I would probably want to do is take my assembly language, target LLVM IR, and let the LLVM infrastructure translate that to whatever target CPU you want to hit. That's probably where LLVM will come in this particular scenario. Very, very late bound. So, so anyway, this kind of gives you an idea of some of the thoughts that I've been having of where this would go. And here's the thing. I did this example because it just seemed small enough for me to be able to play with it without having it to get too complex without anything running. But my thought is, so here's, I am calling this base code. Not a very original name, but I don't have a better name for it at the moment. Base code is a language that lets you build languages. Now, out of the box, base code would probably just have more or less what you see. The ability to define grammars, the ability to define compilers or translators for those grammars, the built-in assembly language that matches the virtual platform, and whatever compiler directive or, you know, language directives the base code system needs to be able to run the meta compilation process, okay? On top of base code, I'm thinking of writing something called base code, I'm gonna call it base code C or something, I don't know, for lack of a better term. This would be a language defined in base code that looks an awful lot like C. Now it's going to be a little different, right? It's going to be a little different. So this is probably not base code. I don't know. Base code simple. I don't know. This language, again, it's going to look a lot like C. It'll have curly braces, because that makes all the difference in the world. But it'll have a better type system and some other features, right? But it's important to understand that any language that's built in base code is still base code. So even though you might start writing a program in base code simple, and you could write the entire program in that language and it would be just fine. If you decided you needed additional languages, you still have base code at your disposal. So you can immediately then define any additional grammars or compilers that you might need. So base code simple, like I say, is going to be a lot like C. And that way, we only have to define things using the base code assembly language at one layer. So at the lowest layer, base code simple, whatever I call it, I don't know what I'm going to call it. We define that translator using the assembly language, and then we don't have to deal with the assembly language that much anymore, right? Once we've done that, that's it. Now, if you need it, it's always there. You know, my intention is it'll never be hidden. It's just that you may not need it in the default case. Now, the other thing is that this is going to be fully recursive. So once you have a new language built, you can use that language to define implementations for other languages. So once base code simple is designed, then we can have a grammar that uses base code simple as the implementation, right? You don't have to use the assembly language. It's not like that's hard coded. That's just there as the fallback if you have nothing else, or if you need it, right? If you need to express something at that lower level, you have that choice. But once you have higher and higher and higher abstracted languages available to you, you can implement other languages using those. So then, again, my rough goal here with base code is, you know, step one is define the virtual machine and assembly. And I want to keep this very simple to start with, right? Just enough to get bootstrapped. It doesn't have to be uber complex in the beginning. Step two is define the simple language using the grammar, compiler, metasystem. Step three is build the simplest core library, so memory, types, math, in simple. Then step four is to rewrite steps 1 through 3 in simple. Remove C. Right. So that's my current thought process on how this ends up working. How it gets from a, you know, primordial idea to something that's bootstrapped. Right. So we start with C++, we build steps 1 through 3, we get that working. Once that's working, step 4 is to rewrite 1 through 3 using simple. And again, simple is not the name I'm going to use, but I'll come up with something. And then we get rid of C++. And then at that point, we have our own ecosystem, our own language, everything, you know, or languages as the case may be, and we can start fresh from there. So then after that, right, step 5 would be to build out more libraries, refine simple language, whatever that is. And then step 7, right, would be to tackle real domain problems, creating any new languages needed, right? And I've kind of talked about this, right? I have ideas of what I want that to be when I get there, but this could really spawn off into any directions. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of give everybody a preview of what I was thinking. This is kind of my, profit, right? I wish. This has kind of been my, background thread project that's been running in my brain when I'm not, thinking about other things. And like I said, there's a bunch of other stuff in history that kind of points to this being a viable idea. It's just like a lot of things, for whatever reason, they fall out of favor. And of course, I mean, I could see why a company like Microsoft or Oracle or any of them would not be as happy with a solution like this, because then this literally obliterates. I mean, think about it. If this makes it at least approachable for the average developer to create a language. Once they see an example, and once we've bootstrapped beyond them needing to do the virtual assembly language, now the language monopoly is busted, right? Who cares? You can get whatever languages you want. And so that treadmill, that's the thing one of the things I'm trying to tackle with this is this language treadmill we're on, because we're given compilers, we're given runtimes they're cut off. Here's the syntax, here's what it looks like, here's what the language can do. Oh, you have to wait until the next version of the compiler before you can do the next thing, right? Yes, even high-level languages, right? The idea is this will let you build the highest level languages. It doesn't start that way. Nothing starts that way. We're gonna move this to the point where you don't have to worry about the low-level stuff, but it will all be there. And so if you want to drill down and use the low-level stuff, you can. So if you're writing a game as an example and you don't want all the extra abstraction, or your abstractions are around more low-level things, then you can choose to do that. But if you're building, boring business applications, then you can build the highest of highest level abstractions that you want on the fly in the compiler that can be used instantly in any context. To make things easier, to make things simpler. So, yeah, that's the goal of it all. And I can't spell. So anyway, yep, those are the current thoughts that are percolating in the background there. So we'll see. We'll see where we can take that stuff. But yeah, I'll continue brewing on that stuff in the background. And so, all right, well, I managed almost 3 hours today, I guess. So, yeah, I've made my notes, and I'm going to rest for the remainder of the day, and hopefully tomorrow I'll feel better. If not, we might have another short stream until I kind of recuperate, and maybe we'll just focus on small stuff. Like I said, I try not to do really big coding things when I don't feel well, because just learning from experience, it's like I'm coding while I'm drunk, I do a bunch of stuff and it doesn't turn out well. And then I look at it later and I'm like, why did I do this? Why did I do this? So I think that's going to do it for me today. And I will be online again tomorrow, because I most likely will be awake regardless. So, and we'll just, I'll keep chugging along a little bit at a time. So thanks everybody who dropped by. Had a lot of new people show up today. That was great. And yeah, Sean, if you're still listening, like I say, ping me on Discord. We can chat about, what you guys are doing. And yeah, and I'll be back. Oh, and also Slayer Darth, if you're interested in the web stuff, just ping me, and we can talk about that stuff too. So, all right, everybody have a good day. I will see you tomorrow at 5 a.m. See, my brain is really not working. And have a good day, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Bye now.